There is a new assassination czar serving under President Obama. The White House counter-terror chief, John Brennan, has taken a new role in deciding who is going to be targeted by drone attacks or raids, and has created a new procedure for vetting military and CIA targets. Now, this process is pretty new, just over a month old. But the way it works is that Brennan's staff, and he has his own staff, of course, in the White House, consults the Pentagon, the State Department, other agencies, and the AP reports it as other agencies, and decide who goes on the kill list. Well, it's a kill or capture list, but the directive, of course, comes from the president himself, who, by the way, at least according to other anonymous officials who have leaked this information, is very involved in the process. And this is the impression that they want you to get. Barack Obama, as the decider-in-chief, has a very complex process where he gets baseball cards of the global war on terror in front of him. They actually refer to them as that, as the baseball cards, of profiles with pictures of suspected terrorists. And he's very, very personally involved, and not a single terrorist ever dies without Obama giving them the stamp of approval to carry out the attack. But there was a military process that's been in place since 2009 that was replaced by this with John Brennan. Now, there was a senior administration official, again, speaking anonymously because this is U.S. officials are not allowed to publicly describe the classified targeting program. Now, if they didn't want this to get out, there'd be a huge stink about it getting out. You know, hey, who are these whistleblowers? I mean, Bradley Manning, as an Army PFC, leaks information about U.S. war crimes. You know, see something, say something. Unless it's U.S. war crimes, then you get tortured, stripped to your underwear, as Bradley Manning was, and put on trial as a traitor. But if you're a senior administration official speaking anonymously to the Associated Press, then you're just doing the propaganda bidding of the president, or serving the needs of the administration and quietly getting this out. Like, we don't want to brag about how we murder people. We just want people to know that there are administration officials that will speak anonymously, that will let the American people know the truth about just how hard we're working to keep you safe, and how much Obama cares about using force judiciously. Right. So basically, Brennan is now managing this process that involves the military and the CIA, and then he makes the final recommendations to the president. The new Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Martin Dempsey, is somewhat at odds with this because he was more involved in the process, but part of his objective as Joint Chiefs Chair has been shrinking the U.S. military, at least according to the Associated Press, as the Afghan war winds down, and less on, more focus on covert wars overseas. With Dempsey less involved in this process, Brennan believed there was an even greater need to draw together different agencies' viewpoints, showing the American public that al-Qaeda targets are chosen only after painstaking and exhaustive debate, which is, of course, a poor substitute for judicial review or due process, but that's okay. They can consult all the agencies they want to get all of the propaganda from all the bullshit different sources to bring it together to create the best excuses to kill innocent people. Or rather, to kill people with drone strikes as opposed to actually going out and capturing them. But some of the officials carrying out the policy are equally leery of, quote, how easy it has become to kill someone, one said. The U.S. is targeting al-Qaeda operatives for reasons such as being heard in an intercepted conversation plotting to attack a U.S. ambassador overseas, the official said. Stateside, that conversation could trigger an investigation by the Secret Service or FBI. Defense Department spokesman George Little said the department was, quote, entirely comfortable with the process by which the American counterterrorism operations are managed. Oh, really? Entirely comfortable? No surprise there, right? Why would we be uncomfortable? The CIA did not respond to a request for comment. How typical, right? Plain secret squirrel. So, There's a 30-day limit on this, just so you know. If a target isn't captured or killed within 30 days after being chosen to go on the list, the case must be reviewed. Yes, so it's very, very, very careful. And the CIA has a more secret process for this. Only a select number of high-ranking staff can preside over the debates run by the agency's Covert Action Review Group, which then passes the list to the CIA's Counterterrorism Center to carry out the drone strikes. So, who does this go to? The Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, is briefed on these actions, who reports to the President, who allegedly also works with John Brennan here. Where does the input come from? How is this questioned or challenged, if not by due process, by a judicial review, by hiring an attorney in defense of the alleged suspect, perhaps even trying them in absentia if necessary? Well, when no crime has actually been committed and you want to murder someone, why would you let pesky legal barriers like that get in the way? No reason. But we know from history and that I can tell you from my experience in Iraq, but from anybody reading the news knows that the people who are the sources of this intelligence are just regular people in Iraq and Afghanistan or wherever else the CIA has agents around the world, or there are military posts where you can rat someone out in hopes of getting a reward. Because while the U.S. government is all hyped up with this global war on terror thing as the great excuse for more government spending, restrictions of freedoms here at home, well, shit, they'll look for any excuse to conduct such a drone strike. So you can walk into an American embassy anywhere in the world and say, hey, I got some intel for you. My neighbor, who I've never fought with before, who's not a threat to my business in any way, who doesn't have any disputes with me, whose son isn't dating my daughter. No, it couldn't be anything like that. I heard he's thinking about planting a bomb, and you should probably kill him with a drone strike. Oh, and by the way, you should probably give me a few $1,000s for this key intel. These paid snitches are not just paid to generate bad intel, as we saw repeatedly in Iraq and Afghanistan, but now, of course, all over the world, people are being paid to generate false intelligence, to set each other up, to create opportunities for the American empire to justify the global war of terror. So, what is the benefit of drone strikes? Why drone strikes? And when it's a kill or capture list, you would think, I mean, the raid on the bin Laden compound that resulted in bin Laden's death as opposed to his capture was probably done for, well, obvious reasons. If you capture bin Laden, you have to put him on trial. You have to actually examine the evidence and have due process, and we wouldn't want that. That could get messy. That could get people questioning the official government story of 9/11. That could have people realize that the global war of terror is a sham, that we had nothing to be afraid of in the first place except for our government. But it's fucking cowardly is what it is to say, well, we have this guy who's a suspected terrorist, or we've determined by our complex judicial review, extrajudicial review, is a terrorist. So instead of sending a SEAL team to go capture him, we're going to send a drone to take him out. And the reason they do this is because it's, well, aside from the fact that it's cowardly and neat and convenient, if you actually capture someone, then you have to do something with him. You have to either have some kind of extradition or just take him to Guantanamo as an enemy combatant. And that just raises all sorts of legal problems. I mean, the Pakistani government, the worst they'll do when you kill a bunch of civilians, no worse, you kill a bunch of Pakistani soldiers with a drone strike, they'll cut off some of your military logistics access to Afghanistan. But they can't raise any legal objections. They can't, if you capture somebody, though, and you take him away, you take him to Afghanistan, to a prison there, you take him to Guantanamo, heaven forbid, you take him here to the United States, well, that gets messy. That gets complicated. That gets just ugly. That gets Americans questioning the legitimacy of our government, and we couldn't possibly have that. So in order to justify all of this murder, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, gave a speech in March, and I want to say hat tip to David Swanson for bringing me these choice quotes, but I want to share a selection from this speech in which he justified basically the ability of the president to decide at any moment to kill anybody who could be doing nothing, just sitting at home on a sofa with no charges, no arrest, no trial, no approval from a court, no approval from a legislature, no approval from the American people. That's right, we have elected Barack Obama to be the murderer-in-chief, and here is how it is made legal. Not right, not moral, not just, but legal. Big difference. So he starts with a quote from JFK.
Since this country's earliest days, the American people have risen to this challenge and all that it demands. But as we have seen, and as President John F. Kennedy may have described best, and I quote, in the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. Now, half a century has passed since those words were spoken, but our nation today confronts grave national security threats that demand our constant attention and our steadfast commitment. It is clear once again that we have reached an hour of danger. We are a nation at war, and in this war we face a nimble and determined enemy that cannot be underestimated.
Can't be underestimated. Really, can't be underestimated. Can I underestimate Al-Qaeda? I think I can. Or could it possibly be that the government is conveniently way overestimating, if not outright fabricating, the capabilities of Al-Qaeda? And by fabricating, I don't mean fabricating reports of the capabilities of Al-Qaeda. I mean literally fabricating the capabilities of Al-Qaeda. And I'm not talking about Ronald Reagan back in his days in the presidency back in the 80s, arming the Taliban, who he called the freedom fighters in Afghanistan, to fight the Soviet Union. No, I'm talking about all of the covert things that our CIA does, like, well, shit. We don't even have to go to the CIA for this one. Attorney General Eric Holder, fast and furious, running guns into Mexico. Yeah, to give to the drug cartels, who conduct their own form of terrorism that is probably a greater threat to freedom than anything Al-Qaeda has ever done. Never mind that it's the American war on drugs that is the American government's terrorism against the American people. But, all right, back to the speech. Well, let me just say on that point, I guess we could not underestimate Al-Qaeda if that the homemade bombs and cell phones and IEDs had actually defeated the $1 trillion U.S. military effort, or if Iran was not threatening to fight back if attacked. Maybe this could just be dismissed and could not be underestimated. But that's not what he's talking about here. What he's talking about is more like the Red Scare, the pervasive war that is everywhere all the time, and that justifies the murder of anybody at any moment we suspect them of being an enemy combatant because it's an act of war. Even if there's nothing about the victim that would suggest they're an enemy combatant, other than the fact that they're being murdered by the U.S. government. He goes on.
I know that more than a decade after the September 11th attacks, and despite our recent national security successes, including the operation that brought to justice Osama bin Laden last year, there are people currently plotting to murder Americans who reside in distant countries as well as within our own borders. Disrupting and preventing these plots and using every available and appropriate tool to keep the American people safe has been and will remain this administration's top priority.
Just to put this in perspective for a moment, I'd like to share some government statistics from a 2004 National Safety Council estimates, a report based on data from the National Center for Health Statistics and the U.S. Census Bureau, which found that you are 17,600 times more likely to die from heart disease than a terrorist attack, 12,571 times more likely to die from cancer than from a terrorist attack, 11,000 times more likely to die in an airplane accident than from a terrorist plot involving an airplane. You are 1,048 times more likely to die from a car accident than from a terrorist attack. You are 404 times more likely to die from a fall than from a terrorist attack. You are 87 times more likely to drown than die in a terrorist attack. You are 13 times more likely to die in a railway accident than from a terrorist attack. You are 12 times more likely to die from accidental suffocation in bed than from a terrorist attack. You are 9 times more likely to choke to death on your own vomit than to die in a terrorist attack. You are 8 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a terrorist. You are 8 times more likely to die from accidental electrocution than a terrorist attack. You are 6 times more likely to die from hot weather than you are from a terrorist attack. Hope that helps put things in perspective for you. And just to go back to reveal the depths of Obama's hypocrisy on these national security, civil liberty, not being murdered unjustly issues, as Kennedy said, quote, "As president, I will close Guantanamo, reject the Military Commissions Act, and adhere to the Geneva Conventions. Our Constitution and our Uniform Code of Military Justice provide a framework for dealing with the terrorists. Our Constitution works. We will again set an example for the world that the law is not subject to the whims of stubborn rulers and that justice is not arbitrary." Now, let my Attorney General tell you why I, as Supreme Leader of the United States of America, Admiral General Barack Hussein Obama, get to basically decide if anyone dies at any time because of my whims as a stubborn ruler, right? Back to Holder. Simply put, since 9/11, hundreds of individuals have been convicted of terrorism or terrorism-related offenses in Article 3 courts and are now serving long sentences in federal prisons. No one has ever escaped custody. No judicial district has suffered any kind of retaliatory attack. Right, because if you're pissed off that the American government is occupying your country, murdering people legally, and just destroying your chances at any kind of peaceful future, why would you come to the United States and attack a judge when you can just shoot the U.S. troops that are conveniently guarding road checkpoints in your country, just standing there as sitting ducks? Isn't that great? The American troops, cannon fodder, suckers to bear the blame and take the heat for the oppression of our politicians. So, moving on to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. This administration has worked in other areas as well to ensure that counterterrorism professionals have the flexibility that they need to fulfill their critical responsibilities without diverging from our laws and our values. Last week brought the most recent step when the President issued procedures under the National Defense Authorization Act. This legislation, which Congress passed in December, mandated that a narrow category of al-Qaeda terrorist suspects be placed in temporary military custody. Bullshit. That's not what the NDAA did. The NDAA authorized the federal government to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens without trial. That was the specific provision of the NDAA that got everybody worked up. And it's a technicalitarian argument because the government would have done that anyways. If they wanted to disappear American citizens without legal process, they do it. They could, no problem. But that this legal justification is now being obscured by Eric Holder just goes to show how much they want you to believe that they're the good guys looking out for the safety of all Americans.
Now, I realize I've gone into considerable detail about tools we use to identify suspected terrorists and to bring captured terrorists to justice. It is preferable to capture suspected terrorists where feasible, among other reasons, so that we can gather valuable intelligence from them. But we must also recognize that there are instances where our government has the clear authority, and I would argue the responsibility, to defend the United States through the appropriate and lawful use of lethal force.
And here by government, Holder means the president, whether it's Obama or Romney or anybody else who ever becomes president. That person alone gets to decide what is lawful and what is not, and who gets to live and who gets to die.
This principle has long been established under both U.S. and international law. In response to the attacks perpetrated and the continuing threat posed by al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces, Congress has authorized the President to use all necessary and appropriate force against those groups.
Okay, this is the simple unconstitutionality of the global war on terror. Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the sole power to declare war. And that is to acknowledge legally that a state of war exists, that we have been attacked, and that was supposed to be the threshold for starting a war. You know, you only start a war when you've been attacked. At least that was our founders' assumption, because they didn't predict what Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell speech when he left the presidency, that we should beware the influence of the military-industrial complex that has obviously grown out of control since World War II. But this is not constitutional because it's not a declaration of war. The authorization for the use of force, which authorized Bush to invade Iraq and originally Afghanistan, was not constitutional because it did not constitute a declaration of war. But here's what's worse, is that the language here used by holders is basically saying, yeah, we can kill anybody we want at any time. Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces. I am hereby an associated force of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and whatever the fuck other terrorist group, Al-Shabaab, you can dream of, because I defend their right to free speech on the internet. Yeah, there you go. So now I am an associated force by some of the loose definitions that have been used by the government to rope people in to justify murder of individuals unconstitutionally.
Because the United States is in an armed conflict, we are authorized to take action against enemy belligerents under international law. The Constitution empowers the President to protect the nation from any imminent threat of violent attack. And international law recognizes the inherent right of national self-defense. None of this is changed by the fact that we are not in a conventional war.
And none of this changes the fact that your definition of self-defense is kind of a new one here. You know, somebody once told us that somebody else thought something bad about us, so we're going to act in self-defense and kill them. Yeah. All right. He goes on.
Now, some have called such operations assassinations. They are not. And the use of that loaded term is misplaced.
So they would be assassinations except for the fact that we created legal justification for them. That's what he's saying here.
Here, for the reasons that I have given, the U.S. government's use of lethal force in self-defense against a leader of al-Qaeda or an associated force who presents an imminent threat of violent attack would not be unlawful, and therefore would not violate the executive order banning assassination or criminal statutes. Now, it is an unfortunate but undeniable fact that some of the threats that we face come from a small number of United States citizens who have decided to commit violent attacks against their own country from abroad, based on generations-old legal principles and Supreme Court decisions handed down during World War II, as well as during this current conflict. It's clear that United States citizenship alone does not make such individuals immune from being targeted.
Oh, really? So if you're a U.S. citizen abroad and we've gone through our extrajudicial process of deciding that you're an affiliate of al-Qaeda and put you on the killer capture list, we can deny you of the due process afforded to you under the Constitution as a U.S. citizen. This is the justification that was used not just for killing Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a really good propagandist, the cleric, the spokesman, so to speak, for al-Qaeda, born in New Mexico, killed by drone strike in Yemen. And I suppose he might use this same justification for killing Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, his 16-year-old son, by drone strike, along with a few other insignificant pieces of collateral damage.
Now, let me be clear. An operation using lethal force in a foreign country targeted against a U.S. citizen who is a senior operational leader of al-Qaeda or associated forces and who is actively engaged in planning to kill Americans would be lawful at least in the following circumstances. First, the U.S. government has determined after a thorough and careful review that the individual poses an imminent threat of violent attack against the United States.
Now, I don't know if it's because of or just as a nice side effect of the government's incapability of conducting thorough and careful reviews. And by the way, it's government's thorough and careful reviews that have decided that alcohol is legal and marijuana is not, and that killing U.S. citizens is okay, but threatening a politician or threatening to expose a politician can land you in jail. That has led to the idea of judicial oversight. That is, you have a judge, someone separate from the administrative, executive branch of the government, at least allegedly. This is how it's supposed to work.
Second, capture is not feasible. And third, the operation would be conducted in a manner consistent with applicable law of war principles.
Right. Law of war. Like, maybe that nice tenet of the Christian just war theory, and remember Obama still claims to be a Christian, that says you should minimize collateral damage, which would say you should never use drone strikes when you can send in a special forces team to capture somebody.
Some have argued that the president is required to get permission from a federal court before taking action against a United States citizen who is a senior operational leader of al-Qaeda or associated forces. This is simply not accurate. Due process and judicial process are not one and the same, particularly when it comes to national security. The Constitution guarantees due process. It does not guarantee judicial process.
Ha! See, that's how we get around that neat little problem.
Now, that is not to say that the executive branch has or should ever have the ability to target any such individuals without robust oversight, which is why, in keeping with the law and our constitutional system of checks and balances, the executive branch regularly informs the appropriate members of Congress about our counterterrorism activities, including the legal framework, and would, of course, follow the same practice where lethal force is used against United States citizens.
And that is how Barack Obama murders people legally.